Yes,
But
very
as you
surprised.
can see, as you can see with my hair,
Mm.
I've yes, this is I've been asked back to do the second series
Oh,
of a
good.
popular TV series, right, in costume, but I can't tell you what it is. But when I turned up on set today, um, Nikki, who's one of the costume designers, she said, "Oh, I watched through the footage of you last year, and I thought, well, I haven't bloody seen it." And she said, "Oh, blah blah blah." And oh, then she said, you know that book you gave me on the other production? I said, yeah, book number two. So she went home with the Ghosts of Glamorgan book, and she says to her husband, she says, look at the book I've got. And then her husband goes into the living room and she says, look at the book I've got. I've got number one Ghosts of Glamorgan. And the woman's going, what? Hang on a minute. I've got number two. You've got, yeah, because I collect his
Wow.
books.
Wow. Yeah. See there. They're meant to be
Same at
those two,
last.
aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, it's, it's,
Teamwork.
it's, it's a small world, folks.
It
It's a small
is.
world. So excitedly today, I've decided this is what we're going to do today. And yeah, sorry about the delay. Michelle phoned me up in an absolute panic. Basically, we've got a male. Well, we got a ram yearling, and he had his hoof caught up in some plastic netting about 3 weeks ago. And it got swollen. Well, we had the vet out a few days ago and whatever, and now his whole hoof has fallen off. So
Oh,
Michelle's
Wow.
in an absolute panic. So I basically said, well, you're gonna have to try and on 1 second. You're gonna have to try and compress the wound somehow. And there's nothing I can do. And she said, oh, it's
Protect
been
it.
dragged
Yeah.
through the mud. And I've just said, look, you're
oh
gonna
my
have to
gosh.
stop it bleeding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not going to be it's not going to be pleasant for the, it's probably not going to be able to develop a hoof again, but we're going to have to see how it
Oh
goes.
dear.
So and oh yeah, sorry, I've distracted myself. I've decided to do the following if we can do it this week. If I've decided to chuck in this. Did the Anglo-Saxon era really exist? There's one. I wanted to give you some bite-sized Roman Iron Age stuff. I want to give you one of the most iconic stories of British heroic resistance against the Romans debunked. I want us to do a final update of the Iron Age in Orkney. I also want to just remind us again of that wonderful hoard that was found, that we've mentioned a couple of times. That's the one that was basically up in northern England. So we're going to do that one. And also, I want us to look at a find in Scotland, which has just been made, an Iron Age chariot wheel in Scotland. Um, and and also, if we get through that, we'll be talking about Vercingetorix. But then again, I've got to get home tonight, so it would be good to be finished by no later than 9:20. So let's see how it goes. Right. Other than Mikhail Gorbachev, anything you want to say, Rog?
Yeah, I found something about two detectives had found some gold Anglo-Saxon items, and one was a raven's head, which
Hmm.
was fine with a ring. And I got it on the phone now, if you can see it. It's the raven's head. It looks a bit odd with a long beak.
Hey, Roger, why do we just put this on
Well, that's
that?
the
Oh
thing. If you
yeah.
want to do it, well, just go in
Yeah,
metal detectors on a raven's head gold find. That'll pull it up.
right. So we'll do this straight away, Rog. It's pointless. I thank you for showing us the image on there, but let's see if we can get this online straight away. So
Well, I don't know what time if
let's.
you wanted to pull it up or not.
So what are we looking for, Rog? We're looking for Anglo-Saxon, are we?
Anglo it's about 1400 years old, they reckon.
Anglo Saxon
Raven's
uh,
head, the title,
Raven's
which was
head.
quite holy to them. It gave the rise to the god Woden, Wednesday.
Right, metal
So it was a
detectors. Right,
special
okay.
item for them,
Okay,
emblem.
let's just see if we can find it. There it is. Right, how do we start with this? I know Paul Gould, by the way.
That's it,
Um,
yes. That was
if it's the same guy. There we go.
that's it. There's the raven's
Oh,
head.
wow.
It looks a bit odd, but it's a long beak.
Hang on, let's go with that one there. So hang on. So we got that raven. I tell you what, it's going up and down the screen. So let's just see if we
That's
can get
it.
the
That's
article
it.
itself.
Right there.
Make a good opener.
There we go. I think Paul Goff is the same. I know this guy. So Raven's head. Hang on, it's not there. Hang on a minute.
Well, we had just what was that? Screen of pictures.
There we go. They are metal detecting in the quarry there.
They found it in the field at the end of the day. So
as always.
southwest England.
Hang on a minute. Not. Oh,
Well,
right. It's not coming up. Right, it's not coming up. Right, let's just go back again. It
You
did
managed
sound
to
like a
start.
good idea.
I think it's taking a while to download your pictures, Carl. That's the problem.
Hold it.
That one, go for that one. Yeah.
That one there.
Yeah.
Garnet's eyes and one eye's left. Which is Garnet.
57 grams of gold.
Oh, that's quite small then, isn't it?
Yeah, it's only a small thing.
Yeah, do you want to read out some stuff for us, Roger, or do you want me to do it?
Well, I'll do it quickly because you should push your time. I don't want to ramble on too long.
Yeah, go on, Rog, go for it. Go.
It found in January by two detectives who contacted the British Museum and said they think it's special. Yes, it is. They cleaned it and inspected, checked it, and they said it is an Anglo-Saxon raven's head, which was holy to them, and it gave rise to the god Woden, as in Wednesday. The rings are smaller. I think Garnet's in, and the other items shown there, and it's got to go for treasure trove because of the nature of it all. But they had a whole bunch of stuff right in the corner of the field at the end of the day, and it's dated to the 600s. So it's an amazing find, they say, for what they found elsewhere.
So Roger, if you say a bunch of stuff, is that's basically the bunch of stuff?
Yeah, there, yeah.
There.
Small items.
So it looks like this could be from some kind of burial by the looks of it.
Something, and I mean, jewelry type things, or
those look like sword hilts.
That thing, yeah, sword pommel, yeah, on the left there.
Yeah, and the elliptical things look like the hilts of a small sword or dagger.
Yeah, they do, Andy. The scabbard.
Yeah.
Oh, the scabbard.
No, the scabbard's what it goes in.
No, what I mean, Andy, these could be the tops of the scabbards.
Yes, they could. Yeah, the rest of it. Yeah. Looks nice.
It's quite unusual, apparently, in being examined.
Oh, there you go. Hang on, it came up better then, didn't it?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
I've got to hold it on the screen. There.
Wow. That's really nice stuff.
That it really is nice. So, Roger, can you help me a minute? Is that on the left there? Is that another image of? That's not the raven there, is it? That's something else.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Right. Okay. So these could be the top stuff.
They distorted the beak like a parrot's beak because a raven's beak curves slightly at the end, but not as much as these.
Actually, yeah, that is a different thing on the right there. So that's there.
It's another item in there. They mentioned focused on this one now on the left.
Yeah. Oh, anyway, thanks for that, Roger. I really appreciate that one. We'll see if there's any more known about it. Oh, right. So that's interesting there because you've got that's there as they found it in the ground, and then you've got that there.
Yeah.
I know you're saying 56 grams of gold isn't a lot, but then again, when you think about it, that's a lot of gold that needs to be mined. Do you know what I mean? That's a fair bit.
They got these gold, looks like globules on the surface. They've really made a big job of it. They have. Amazing, I think, and only one garnet left instead of two of the eyes, but still. So
that really is pretty, Rog. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Well, it's amazing and different.
Yeah, it is. Okay then, thank you for that, Rog. Anything else, Judith? Anything you want to tell us?
I did see something, but I've been so busy today. I thought I'll come back to that and make a quick note of it, and then I forgot. Sorry.
And you never find it again.
No, sorry.
Anne's disappeared. Margaret.
The only thing I've seen is new evidence at Maidenhill. They've been Bournemouth University.
Hang on. I think we're just going to do that one. Tell us what. Go on.
Well, they've been doing DNA checks on the skeletons there, which show that it wasn't a massacre by the Romans. But
that's what we're doing.
Okay.
We're doing that.
All right.
We're doing that. Well, obviously, two amazing brains think alike, and I had a message of Emma and her dad earlier on, right? And apparently, if I go to the message on my phone, this is quite strange. They've oh, here we go. She said they got a friend that's staying with them in Cumbria. No, start again. They got a friend that's staying with them in Chepstow, from Longsdale.
From where? Longsdale.
Cumbria. Yeah.
Longsdale.
He lives just north of Kendal in that little village that Postman Pat's best on. She mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, so I'm guessing it'd be the same person.
Oh yes, the same guy. He's staying with him. Yeah. So apparently,
is he called Pat?
Apparently, he left at 10 o'clock. He left at 10 o'clock this morning, and it was about 6 o'clock. He still hadn't arrived.
Oh.
Mind you, with the rain and the driving on the road, it took me 4 hours to get to Bristol from West Wales, when it usually takes about 2 hours 20 minutes.
Or has he gone on the train?
Oh, it'd be about a week then.
Yeah, because they just don't.
Oh no, he can't have gone on the train. He's got half a dozen dogs with him.
Half
a dozen dogs.
And he's gone on a road trip. Yeah.
Oh my
I had the word Claire written in my notepad the other day, right, twice. It said Claire and Claire, and Michelle said to me, right, I know there's something going on with you with that woman in Cumbria, right? And then I forgot. I put the note Claire down because it reminded me to sort Michelle's Clarecraft stuff out.
Right.
But I forgot what it meant.
Yeah.
So now she's thinking there's something going on with me and Claire.
No.
Literally just contacted me, wanting to come over.
Oh,
bloody great. That's going to be so good.
No, I've told her not to come till 9:30. So.
Oh, that's good. She'll drop in early, and Michelle will see it. Say, right, there is something going on.
She does it most weeks. Some sort of writes me some sort of mess. Wants to get in a conversation. I can't say it's archaeology. You know that you used to do it every Tuesday night.
Well, perhaps she's hoping for a glimpse of Carl.
Yeah, she could be.
Yeah.
I think there's something
just a glimpse.
I feel it in my bones.
It's the hair. Even the hairdresser today, Erin, she said, "You got beautiful hair," she said.
But before she did
in it.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Shut up, Rod.
It's that French influence. You're right, Rog. Yeah.
We're going to get on with this in a minute. Nothing from you, Andy or Drina?
No.
Panda, no.
Or David, right. Let's crack on with the images. Right, so.
Go for it.
I'm going to be in deep trouble because of you guys. And you, Margaret.
You shouldn't be carrying on then, should you?
I tell you what, right? I couldn't deal with Claire even if you paid me.
No.
Yeah, come on.
Have you seen the woman? She would make mincemeat to me.
Yep.
Well, perhaps you enjoy it. I don't know, Carl.
Yeah,
no
true.
way. Yeah. I tell you what, right? Claire's the type of person, if you upset her, right, that's it.
What, she'll beat you?
Well, she probably would if you asked her. Yeah.
Well, what's wrong with that?
You guys are terrible. Stop it. Right. Now, what do we want first? Hang on a minute. Let's just see what we can do first. Right. Okay. I think what we might do is the one that takes us off on a side journey. It's this one right now. I was intrigued by this because it was actually published in Current Archaeology the year before. But this is the typical image that you might see when you used to go to school. Now, everything that we're going to do tonight is going to be tongue-in-cheek but serious, i.e., if I say something tonight and you say, actually, Carl, you said something totally different all those months back, that's why I'm doing it tonight, right? To sort of give you another point of view. Right. Now, the big question is with this, right? If we want to enlarge that now, love these images from the Victorian era, sort of the early 1900s. Did the Anglo-Saxon era really exist? Now, this is relevant to the Roman invasion, right? In that we love invasions in Britain. Normans, you know, we love them, right? So experts claim Germans never invaded Britain, and the Romans continued to influence English language, religion, and culture long after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West in 476. Now, this is all really relevant stuff, because when my take on all of this is that when we look at Roman era Britain, I usually say it's a joint impact of ideas. So obviously they took a little bit from us, we took a little bit of from them. Did the Romans ever build roads in Britain? Or there were already trackways there, you know, those types of things. Was there coins in Iron Age Britain? Was there coins in Roman Britain? Yes, there was. So this is all being developed and so on, right? This big question again. If I've seen it constantly on the internet now, because you know what we're doing is really topical. If the Romans never invaded Britain, what would have happened? So you know this is a thing that has come up over and over again. So here we go. Anglo-Saxons are thought to have invaded Britain after the fall of the Roman world in the West. Right. So obviously that's developing from the early 400s all the way to 476. Did the Romans ask the Anglo-Saxons to help them with the defense of the coastline against other Anglo-Saxons? All these questions. Experts claims this widely held theory is untrue and there was no such invasion. Now, we're talking about the Anglo-Saxons in the 400s. So if you go back to AD 43, when the Romans are invading proper, right? What type of invasion was that? Everything that I said last week about Caractacus, is it real or is it invented? Right, because most of it's written by the Romans, and most of it's going to be exaggerated. Maybe we might actually find that document one day written by a local person who's actually writing in Ogham, or they're writing in Latin, right? So here's another thing. Instead, England evolved using the Roman blueprint in most aspects of society. So what we're saying, this is another point. Instead, so what we're saying is that there was no real massive Anglo-Saxon incursion in Britain, right? In fact, people evolved the sense of Rome, right? Or did people go back to the way they were? Now, again, we're not really up to discuss this in detail tonight. But what I want us to do is put these little nuggets in our head before we get proper into Rome, because we've been really getting into Rome the past few weeks, because we've done Carta Mantua, we've looked at the likes of Caractacus. You know, without you knowing it, guys, you've been doing the Romans by stealth. So these groups of people coming over to Britain that we were all talked about, which we were all taught in school from the mid 400s into the 500s onwards, the Angles, the Saxons, the Franks, the Jutes, and so on. Yeah, or were they just small groups of people sort of trading and stuff, which is probably more like it. So in other words, what we're saying, is there such thing as the Anglo-Saxon era? There certainly definitely is such thing as the Roman era in Britain, but you will also come across people talking about the Roman era in Britain as in places not existing, right? And you'll hear me talking about were there such things as Celts? You know, all these different things are really relevant. So the Anglo-Saxon era that is widely believed to have followed the Roman withdrawal from Britain, schools still teach that. After the Romans left Britain, Britain was invaded and colonized by a throng of German-speaking barbarians who were extremely butch, known as the Angles, Saxons, the Franks, and the Jutes, and so on. So this common wisdom dictates then gave birth to the so-called Anglo-Saxon era, which endured in a number of different guises until a conquest of the Normans, and when they proclaimed ownership of Britain on the 25th of December, 1066. So again, I love illustrations like this. I used to love going through books and finding these illustrations. This is what really, these types of things really inspired me to really start to look at archaeology. I used to love these things. Got loads of books on the shelf actually. So this prevalence that we have this invasion is based on the fact that we've got a Germanic based language in Britain. But this is now questionable. This is very, very questionable. How much of Britain was invaded? How much of Britain actually just continued? And this is the thing. This is one thing that I do say. So when we do look at the Roman period from AD 43 onwards, however, there's a bit of a caveat then. We're not talking about the Roman period from AD 43 onwards. We're talking about the Roman period from approximately 54 BC onwards. That's something else we're going to discuss tonight if we've got time. So was there a proper invasion? Was there proper colonization of Britain? The likelihood is no. This is something that even the likes of a certain Dr. Beard talks about. She talks about there was no real Anglo-Saxon invasion, and I think it's something that a few other archaeologists are talking about. That this idea that there's a great invasion after the Roman world collapsed is now being put into the spotlight. So post-Roman Britain slowly evolved, and aspects of the fallen empire became ingrained within English culture. It's very, very important question there. So if everything that I'm saying tonight with this specific thing, let's look at another image. There we go. Butch guys in Roman armor. Probably never ever looked like this at all, but this is the Ermine Street Guard. The one thing that's always argued, right, is there must have been some invasion of Britain, but after the Romans, the Roman world collapsed in Britain, the Roman control collapsed, because we're not speaking Latin. But then again, how many Romans actually spoke Latin? Most of them spoke a variety of different languages from across the empire, right? Some people spoke Latin. Some people spoke like an Etruscan tongue, which was not really Latin. Some people spoke Greek. We've got people who are buried near York, who are actually buried in Egyptian style, and those people would have been speaking in a completely different tongue than everybody else. So over the centuries, language, religion, and culture remain firmly based on what? The Roman blueprint. And why do we say that? Because of Christianity. Christianity is something that the Romans brought to Britain, but Christianity also ended up in Ireland without the Romans' influence in it. When you think about it, on our buildings today, we still got Latin on some of our ornamental buildings today. Our law in Britain up until recent times used to be based on Latin writings. So we may actually say that there's small groups of people coming over to Britain influencing us, but then again, that's the way it is, as it always has been. Britain, for example, is curry a British dish? Yes, it is now, but it didn't used to be 100 years ago. And when you think about paella, that's not a British dish, but loads of people eat it. That's from Italy. Pasta. Loads of people eat pasta in Britain. That's rice. Chinese meals and so on. It's part of British culture. So we've always been influenced. Coca-Cola, American culture, job done. So when we think about it, this sort of again back to this date. So the first Roman invasion is occurring in Britain. We're looking at 56, 55, and 54 BC under the likes of Julius Caesar. That's another day. It's all going to come up. So and then eventually into the 400s. What we've got after this empire fell, it was thought Saxons invaded Britain in the 400s. However, one expert claims this is a myth. Poppycock. So this is based on what we're looking at is that there's a book that came out 4 years ago called The Emergence of the English by a professor Utzhuisen from Cambridge, interesting enough. An emerite professor of medieval archaeology, and she lays out a theory for how Britain, and specifically England, emerged from its post-Roman era. You could very much argue, couldn't you, that that what we do see in for example, Cymru, Wales, and we've got Cornwall and Cumbria, for example. We're talking about the fringe of the old language surviving, but that old language is pre-Roman, right? It's a pre-Roman language. And those areas like Cumbria, even though you might argue with me, but most of Cumbria is still native British throughout most of the Roman period. So is most of Cymru, Wales, and certainly Cornwall is, right? And for those that actually follow my stuff online, I try to do a daily blog on a Roman site in Britain, but it's not always turning out that way because I'm so busy. But what you'll see is that most of our core Roman stuff. Now, this is a really interesting point. Most of our core Roman stuff in Britain is basically not in Cumbria. We've got military stuff, and there's a reason why that's there. There's a lot of native stuff in Cumbria. There's a lot of native stuff in Cornwall. There's not a lot of native stuff in Cymru, Wales. So what people used to argue, they used to argue that, for example, the Anglo-Saxons invaded Britain. They pushed the Welsh-speaking people over to the fringes in Cumbria and Cymru, Wales, and Cornwall, and therefore that's proof of the Anglo-Saxon invasion. But then again, that might not be the case at all. It's just that the Romans never really pacified those areas completely. They just let them be, right? So what we're talking about is that farms and people and the legal system and religion, the Christianity and so on was fluctuating around the whole of Britain, right? And that reason why I say fluctuating around the whole of Britain, it's a bit like the medieval period. In medieval period, there are lots of people involved in witchcraft, right? In some areas of Britain, the predominant religion isn't Christianity in the medieval period, from 1066 onwards. It's not Christianity, even though we're told that by the teachers in school. We're told that 100% of the people in Britain in the medieval period were Christian. It's completely wrong. So when we think now, what we've got to think about, that this period. I always say this, that the period after Roman civilization breaks down, we know. I used to say this, but I disagree with myself now. I used to say this, that into the late 400s, into the 500s and 600s, we know little about this period than if you equate this to the Iron Age. But now that's not really the case, because we're now starting to learn a lot more about that period from 476 all the way through to the idea of, you know, we're starting to really learn, and we're starting to put everything together. And this is the problem when we look into the late 400s and 500s, because there used to be little information. We always used to say there was big Anglo-Saxon invasion, and it changed everything, and places were destroyed, and there were diseases and so on. But the point is, what we're talking about is that things are very, very different when we actually look at the history and the archaeology and how things develop. So what we're going to do now, I want us to do some bite-sized stuff, right? And you'll note some like schoolology stuff here, but it's always good to do schoolology stuff too. And then what we're going to do, we're going to look at this, and then we're going to look at that, the arrowhead lodged in a spine. And you know what? I've actually got a postcard from the 1930s that was issued by Sir Mortimer Wheeler that I found in a boot sale sometime, right? It's got a stamp on it from the 1930s, and it's got this image in black and white. When I find that, I'll be really happy to find that. So, okay, this is another bit of today, right? This is another bit bite size, right? 5 things you may not know about the Roman conquest of Britain. Now, the question is, how much of this do I agree with? How much of it I agree with? How much of this have we already discussed? We've already discussed that figure in front of us last week. How often do you think about the Roman Empire? Oh my God, I have fantasies about it. I think about it all the time. In fact, can I make a confession to you all, guys? Right, watching this today, whether you're on YouTube, my loyal gang in Cumbria and so on, I'm dreading doing the Roman period, right? Simply because I could do it for years. And if you guys are prepared for me to talk about the Roman period for years, I will do it for years. We will do all the intricacies of finding a tiny bit of wall in Winchester, or a wonderful Roman abutment in Hereford that nobody knows about that's being eroded into the sea. Or we could look at this wonderful coin hoards with 50,000 coins in them. Or we could look at Hard Knot Fort. Or we could look at the invasion of Scotland. Or we could look at the burials, the pottery, and all these wonderful things. It's going to go on and on and on. But then again, maybe that's what you pay me to do. So when we think about this, but so much of how we imagine life back then has been shaped by the big screen, by the likes of Spartacus, love it. We're looking at the likes of Gladiator, absolutely love it. What about all those wonderful films from the 1950s and 60s, right? You know, all of that stuff. There's so many books about the Romans. Do you know what, right? I have got about 300 books on the Romans. If I picked one of those books out and did a class on that, that's 300 lessons. That'll take us 6 years to go through. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a little bit now, a few moments, at the Roman invasion of Britain in AD 43, and we're going to debunk some common myths about that era. For those times, you just can't think of anything else, right? So here we go. This one, right, that figure there, an army of 40,000 Roman soldiers, is highly unlikely that there was an army of 40,000 Roman soldiers invaded Britain. I've already told you last week there'd be about 500 left at the Roman legionary base, right? There'd be soldiers in a hospital, infirmaries. There'd be soldiers going back and forth with supplies. There'd be soldiers in different parts of the empire, from the 2nd Augusta Legion or the 20th Valley of Vitrix Legion, patrolling somewhere on the borders of Germanicus, right? Rather than being in Britain. So they're not full strength. So here we go. So why invade Britain? We mentioned the reason why the Romans invaded Britain last week. It was Caractacus. Got to link that with Vercingetorix sometime, whether it's going to be this week or next week. So Roman rulers were already among the richest men in history and had a huge empire, and Britain wasn't any real threat, was it? Wasn't it? We'll think about that one. It turns out Rome had a new emperor who just wanted to show off a bit, Claudius. Or how much of that is true? Emperor Claudius had taken the throne after the assassination of Caligula and needed to show his power to the Senate. The Romans had to invade somewhere, so why not Iron Age Britain? Is that completely true? Is it how much of that is true? So hopefully, as we look into this, we will see how much of that is true. Some of you will know that I'm a big fan of Caligula. I'm a big fan of Caligula because I think he's one of the unsung heroes of the Roman world. Lots of people think he's an absolute nut job. Some people say I'm absolute nut job, so we've got something in common. But the one thing with Caligula, he was good at building monumental structures. Right, he built a massive legionary site outside Calais and a port. He built roads. He built all these things in a very short reign. And then everything was placed upon him as being a disastrous emperor. And then come into the play is the likes of the likes of Claudius. So again, Julius Caesar also attempted a British invasion in 56, 55, and 54 BC. Few people mention the one in 56. The one in 56 failed, right? It failed. At 55, it sort of succeeded, and 54 did succeed. And Julius Caesar conquered the whole of Britain, apparently, because he received tribute, except he never went probably further than Verulamium. St. Albans, and he had tribute, and he said he conquered Britain. Anyone can do that. The British Empire did it loads of times. For example, when there was a scramble for Africa in the 1879 and into the 1880s, we are said to have conquered the whole of Egypt and Sudan and South and Northern Rhodesia and South Africa and Eritrea and all these wonderful Somaliland and all these wonderful places in Africa. But and Kenya, look at that. But most of these places that we are said to have conquered as British subjects into the late 1870s, 1880s, we didn't conquer all that. We most of it we didn't even know existed, but we just put it on the map. We just basically scramble for Africa, right? The Bosch can have that bit over there, right? The Itais can have that bit. I'm being really racist, by the way, but this is how we saw them. The frogs can have that little bit there. The paella eaters, those Spanish people can have that bit, and the Portuguese, whatever we call them, they can have that bit, right? But it's just little lines on maps, right? So this is exactly what Julius Caesar did with Britain. He said to the Senate, "I've conquered Britain," right? Yeah, fair enough. So what we're talking about, the Romans, what we're talking about is that Iron Age Britain, was difficult. There were various different reasons. Were the Iron Age people ever beaten? No, I don't think so. But the Romans weren't beaten over here either. So back to this as well, Julius Caesar. Again, this is all an overview type thing. So Julius Caesar also had a decent attempt at a British invasion, and he even instated his mate and Rome-friendly king Mad Dubracus to help. So there we go. There were Britain, Mad Dubracus, who was up here helping Julius Caesar. Come on over, all part of the boys. We'll say you conquered Britain, and nobody's going to know. Who's going to know whether Julius Caesar conquered Britain or not? Nobody's going to check on it. So, yeah, there we go. So, it's a bit like me having a secret archaeology class each week. I tell you what, I've got 1,000 people I teach, right? And we don't put it online, but I do teach it. Believe me, I do, right? But I don't. But I'm going to say I did. No, nobody can check on it, Roger, because it's secret. It's a secret class. It's the same. What's that, Rog?
What?
Yeah, I don't know.
Under your favourites.
Yeah, well, Rog, you are my
chasing
fourth
after
favourite.
you and all that. No.
Yeah, Rog, you are my fourth favourite. And look around, she's been chasing after me for years. But not well. Both hands have been, Roger. So basically, let's put that terminology in. But the Celts wouldn't give up without a decent fight. Determined tribes battled fiercely with Caesar's army, but it was only thanks to an uprising in Gaul that they decided to turn back to go and fight them. How much of that is true? Julius Caesar writes a history. That is true because Vercingetorix comes into the throng of things. The reason why Julius Caesar's attention moved back onto Gaul was because between 54 and 52 BC, Vercingetorix is up in rebellion at Elysee, north of Paris, against Roman control. So it was left to later on. So the years go by. So we've got Claudius, Aulus Plautius, lands somewhere around Dover Way. There's a few bays up there which we'll have a chat about with Aulus Plautius. How much of Claudius setting foot in Britain is another story, and his elephants. So the Romans were here to stay, and the Romans were here to really, really influence. There we go. Love it. Another thing, number 3, the Romans invaded, but not many of them moved over. Now, this is something that I've been going on about over and over and over again. Right, so if we think about the British Isles, including all the islands in Scotland, Shetland, Orkney, Ireland, the Isle of Man, the Isle of Wight, at some stage in Britain, the population could have expanded to about 7 million people, right? Max, right? That's the most we could ever think, right? This is over the whole area, right? But very few of them could ever be said to have been Roman. Right, so the Romans brought lots of new ideas and ways of living to Britain, including new ways of viniculture. What did the Romans ever do for us? Peace. We already had peace. Everything from towns and roads to reading and counting, but there wasn't a mass migration of Roman people to the country. That is completely true. When we talk about that, we were already developing our towns. We already had our own roads. Obviously, we must have been able to count to work out how many sheep we got in a field. And reading, maybe we're able to read, but we're not really. Well, actually, carvings on stones. What are they about if we can't read them? So literary. But did the Romans bring all that to us? The answers we could have done without the Romans. So when we think about sort of the main hump of Britain, you know, at the time that the Romans come over, at the time there's about 3 million people. So at the height, there's probably 7, but there we go, by about 200. But this is AD 43, and the Roman army only added a few percent, but they still managed to blend the Iron Age way of life with a distinctive Roman one. And in other words, one of the things that Adolf Hitler, I've got to mention good old Adolf. We've got to put this in this lecture. Adolf Hitler envied the British Empire. He used to say, "How is it the British Empire is able to control?" I think it must have been coming up to 1 billion people at that stage. How can the British Empire control an army? Start again. How can the British Empire control these vast areas like Pakistan and India with only 100,000 troops, right? And 100,000 administrators administrating up to 1 billion people, right? Adolf Hitler used to always wonder how they did that, but the Romans did it. Loads of civilizations have done it, right? We did it because we had more technical innovation, and that's how we managed to control India and Pakistan, right, with only 100,000 soldiers. The Romans didn't even have 100,000 when they were controlling Britain. They didn't need it. A few tens of thousands, and that was all they needed to go. The main idea of Romanization is basically talking on the backdrop that the Joneses have got it down the road. They've got a hypercore system. They've got really nice metal work. Oh oh my God, look at their mosaic, right? Look at the way they draw. You know, look at the way they dress. Look at the way they draw on their walls with the frescoes and all the rest of it. So that's sort of a sense of inspiration. But by AD 300, almost everyone in Britain was considered both culturally and legally Roman, even if they still spoke their own language, and they didn't. In other words, what we're talking about is everyone was Roman. That's it. You Roman. That's the way it is. That's what the Normans did. We're all Norman. Everything in Britain belongs to the king. Yeah, we're all Norman after 1066. Yeah, this is what we're going to do. And Alexander the Great thought the same. Alexander the Great thought when he was going across the subcontinent all the way over to the Hindu Kush, all the way up to Afghanistan, all the way over to where the Indus Valley is, all the way over there. When Alexander the Great's going over there into the 30s, into the by about 325 BC. 330, 325 BC. When he's going across the subcontinent, he basically said, right, everybody is part of my empire, right? And none of them spoke Greek, right? But he built cities. He built about 20 cities called Alexandropolis, right? So and he built roads and he did all this stuff. But most of these people didn't see themselves as Greek because they weren't Greek. Most of these, but they were all part of the new Greek Empire. The empire that would last basically years rather than 1,000 years. So again, this whole thing, that what we're talking about is that those people that there were Roman people who wanted to settle in Britain, such as Lincoln, such as Camalodunum, Colchester. These were coloni, right? And these were places that the Roman veterans would settle. And this was one thing that got on Boudicca's pins, because he was so upset that the Romans had kicked out the population of Camalodunum for settlers, Roman settlers, veterans, right, that she needed to do something about it. So, all of this is really, really very relevant when we look at the mindsets of the Britons. This is why we can't look at Boudica at this minute, because we need all this other information. So not all their roads are straight. In fact, there's a massive debate about roads. Michelle, oh God, Michelle and I sit down and I say to Michelle, name a bit of Britain that I should cover in my Roman video tomorrow, right? And she mentions a place, and I said there's nothing. I say, oh, there's going to be nothing there, right? And there sometimes is. And she said, why didn't you do Roman roads? Unfortunately, lots of the alignments that we said are Roman are not Roman, right? I remember going up to Aspatria and Wigton, and when I went to Wigton, I think it's Wigton, there's a little plaque on the side of the road, and it says there's a little platform, and I was there with my little son Ruben, and we're looking out, and I thought I was saying to Ruben's mum, well, where's the Roman road? And she said, it's over there. And it was a little plaque. And I said, there is no Roman road, right? It's an alignment of where they think a Roman road was. You can't see anything, right? And this is the problem. This is the problem. Roman roads were built on high grounds to reduce risks of ambushes. How much of that is true? You know, but think about what I've just said there. The high grounds have probably already got roads on them anyway. I've written about this in my own book, The Romans in South Wales. So before the Romans came, Britain's roads were mainly unpaved, often muddy tracks. It sounds like the M4 half the time. Yeah, I'm driving along the M4 and there's potholes and there's grass growing through some of the tarmac, and you're thinking, yeah, is this really an improvement? So when the Romans arrived, they decided to sort it out and built over 10,000 miles of new roads. Is that true? Is it fiction? The Romans knew the shortest distance from one place to another was a straight line. So they made all their roads as straight as possible to get around quickly. Well, I don't think it's much of an achievement going from the, when you look at Hard Knot Fort, right, that road itself, right, is a death track, right? It's almost a diagonal road, which is extremely steep. Obviously the Romans built this. No, they didn't. The Romans wouldn't have been able to take anything down there. But anyway, but while the myth suggests they just drew straight lines across the landscape, they actually aimed for the high ground to reduce risk of ambushes to help with drainage. But how much of that is true? Because most Roman alignments of roads are in such weird places, in bog-like landscapes, following ancient trackways, and they did weave around large obstacles such as mountains and rivers. And if you've ever driven along the A1 only once, you can thank the Romans for the quickest journeys, as they first built this direct route between London, Lincoln and York. But was there something already there, like the likes of Ermine Street, the likes of Watling Street, the likes of the Julius Maritima, the likes of the San Helens? How much of those were already there? The San Helens, Roger knows there's about 50 San Helens in Wales, all built under the command of Constantine the Great's mother in the 330s. Really like it. Or Magnus Maximus. We're loving that one. Don't get Judith started. So, this is a really nice one, right? I'm loving this one. So that we know that Boudica led a revolt against the Romans. But when we do the Boudica revolt, I might want to be doing it a different way. And I just want to do it a different way. I'm going to do the blood, and I'm going to do the death. I'm going to be doing the impaling of the women and then cutting their breasts off and shoving them in their mouths. We're going to be doing all of that. But I want to find something else different about it, right? As we're looking at this now. So the Celts were not just one group. So that says it all. So if the Celts are not one group, so are the Celts as a group of people, did they exist in the first place, right? Or is it just a cultural name? Is it just an artifactual name, which is something I go with, right? So when the Romans invaded Britain, the country was made up of different Iron Age tribes known as collectively as the Celts. So in other words, they're the Celts. They're all the Celts, right? That's it. So we're going to call them. They're not the Celts, but that's what we're going to call them. They shared common culture and heritage, but also liked to fight each other. How much of that? But we've mentioned there was a little bit of that. That changed when the Romans arrived, as they now had a common enemy to fight. That's not really true, is it? Because lots of people fought alongside the Romans. This is a really, really good point. This is a really good point. The most famous Celt is probably Boudica, the ancient British queen of the Iceni tribe, who led a revolt against the Romans. But there is something sus in all of this. Right, and what is sus is as follows. Here we go. What is sus? Is that it makes me wonder. You've got Caraticus, you've got Cartamandura. I'll start again. Caraticus, you've got Cartamandura, you've got Boudica. You can chuck Verica in there. You can put Togodumnus in there. You can talk about Conobelinus before all that. But when you talk about the period of the Roman world in Britain, right, there's very few other figures, right? And it makes me suspicious of that narrative that the Romans went across Britain with fighting loads of battles all the time, which I very much question, because there ain't many people resisting Roman rule. I'm going to say it, right? Roger would probably hate me saying this, but I'm going to say it. Most of the tribal people in Britain, particularly South Wales, were just a walkover. There's not a single piece of evidence that there was there's not a single piece of evidence that I've ever conclusively found that the Romans fought anyone anywhere in South Wales. Right? Loads of historians write about it, but based on what? Yep, that might be true. That might not be. I might go deeper and I might be able to find something that contradicts myself, which is great. Which is why we do this. I like to get things wrong, but only when I can find myself to be wrong. Boudica's name means different things to different people. Was the name Boudica actually more than one person? Well, that's a bit dicey. Some saw her as a brave warrior, Celtic superwoman, and, to use a phrase, a feminist icon. You know, a bit like Margaret. She's a feminist icon. But when she rose against Roman rule, she also killed thousands of innocent people and led her army into a bloody massacre. Well, the Zulu did that. Catasweo did that against his own people. But he didn't do that so much against the British settlers. Again, who's writing the history about Boudica? After she lost, did she lose? She died soon after, with some accounts saying she poisoned herself. Whatever the truth, her statue stands outside Parliament, and she is immortalised as one of Britain's first heroic patriots. I can't see Caraticus there, can you? I can't see Cartamandua there. I can't see Verica there. You know, there's lots to be said. Oh, and there you go. We want to remind us, if you, I know you guys think, oh my God, you know, Horrible Histories is a bit sort of for children, but it's not. Horrible Histories is based on real stories told for a narrative that we can all learn something. So if you ever go into a charity shop and you find a book, Horrible Histories, and it's about the Romans, get it, because you'll find nice little facts in there which will help us understand this period a lot better. So let's get on to something else. My God, there's so much we're doing tonight. Okay. So we'll only do a little bit of this and then we're going to take a break. So I'll have banded on for nearly 20 minutes, and so that does me fine. Sorry to interrupt your little stories earlier on. I just needed to let you know I was here. So this is exactly what wonderful Margaret was on about. She was really doing her own work. Oh, and by the way, guys, I know this is I had something on my mind earlier on. It was rhubarb. We got so much bloody rhubarb. Let me know if anyone wants any rhubarb, and we could send some up. We'll send loads of sticks up to Drina, right? And she can dole them out. But you'll have to let me know, Judith, you can have any. So one of the most iconic stories of British heroic resistance against the Romans debunked. It never happened. So this is a really, really good point. So what we're talking about Maiden Castle, right? There's the rear, and there's the front there, right? So what we've got in the north, top of the screen, and there we've got the south. And Dorchester is over here 2 miles away on the right-hand side of the screen, on the bottom side of the screen. So this, oh yes, let's go back to the caption. So the East Gate War Cemetery in 1937, general view from the south. Now, there's an interesting point there, the year. 1937, most people knew that we were going to be at war with Germany anytime, right? And I can remember my grandmother said that her dad made a prediction. He said he said in the winter of 1938, there's going to be another war, right? And there was another war. Now, why have I mentioned any of that? Because whatever's being said by Sir Mortimer Wheeler might be a political message. The Romans invading Britain. The Hun might be invading Britain in 1939, right? And the old enemy, the Hun, right? And funny enough, we were at war with Italy as well. You know, the Romans. So we were at war with the Roman Empire as well after 1939. So anyway, a new archaeological investigation cast doubt on one of the most emblematic accounts of Roman conquest of Britain, questioning whether the violence at the famous Iron Age hill fort of Maiden Castle was the result of a battle with the Romans, suggesting instead that it stemmed from internal conflict among the Britons themselves. Can I tell you the story that I used to do in my lectures? Right. Let's do a little bit of a story. I used to say that the 20th Valley Victorious, the Second Augusta Legion, was led by the to-be emperor Vespasian, General Vespasian. And Vespasian is slowly heading towards this location, Maiden Castle. This is what I used to tell people. So he's there tramping along with his Second Augusta Legion. Maybe it's with the auxiliaries and Ayla cavalry. Maybe it's a strength of 10,000 men altogether. Maybe slightly exaggerated, as we do it. We have to exaggerate the figures. So as he's already gone through London, Londinium as it's be, he's already captured Caliva Atrobatum. Or did the people of Caliva Atrobatum say, "Hey boys," you know, as in I Claudius, you know, "Hey boys, you know, come into Caliva Atrobatum, you can have it," right? Or was it a bloody battle? So obviously, the historians wanted us to think that Vespasian is besieging every single hill fort he comes across, right? Except, as we've already learned, lots of the hill forts are already abandoned before the Romans ever invade Britain in AD 43. We weren't told that at school, but now we are. But back this story, Vespasian's besieging all these hill forts, but the problem is there's no evidence. Now, and at that stage, when we're taught all this in school, nobody knew that Geropolis existed. In fact, we didn't know that Geropolis existed until about a decade ago, right? That big city without a bank and a ditch around it, and Geropolis itself is this big settlement. There's no signs of anyone besieging that and raping and pillaging and killing everybody, right? So the story is that we think, oh my God, you know what's happening, right? Is as the Romans, this is another myth, as the Romans are approaching Maiden Castle, they're building a road, right? They're building this road, you know, they're building road all the way down to the likes of where Maiden Castle is. So if you're marching an army and building a road as you're going along, it's going to take forever to get there, right? So you know they're probably following an existing trackway, but for the story, they're building a road. When it comes close to Maiden Castle, the defenders, the thousands and thousands of defenders of Maiden Castle, are looking out and seeing this massive Roman army of 10,000 warriors, 10,000 iron-clad warriors, right? And lo and behold, Vespasian besieged this locality, right? And everyone dies. Everyone defending this dies. And basically the Romans capture it, and this is a great victory. This is one of the biggest hill fort sites in Britain. Everything that I've just told you is probably complete fantasy, right? But that's what I used to tell people. That's what I used to be taught at school. Didn't question it. The archaeologists didn't question it. The historians didn't question it. One person didn't question that story is also Sir Mortimer Wheeler. What he basically did, he excavated that area there, and he basically said that's the area where Vespasian besieged this great fortress, 50-acre fortress not including the banks and ditches, right? He besieged this, and this was the way in, right? And the problem is with that story, with just that very story, even if you go with what Sir Mortimer Wheeler tells us, he only found 50 bodies there, 50 bodies in this area. And the problem is those bodies tell a different story, don't they, Margaret? So in the 1930s, archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler led one of the most influential excavations in British archaeology at Maiden Castle, because he could. He had the funding. He had his wife, Tessa Wheeler, with him. Considered the largest Iron Age hill fort. There are larger ones now, but, you know, that's life. Hod Hill is slightly larger. But this is the one that people see and know about, and it's the easiest to get to. Yeah, you go to Dorchester, you can walk here. So he found dozens of skeletons with injuries caused by sharp and blunt weapons. One of the bodies even still had a spearhead embedded in its spine. And there it is. It's embedded there. Wheeler mistakenly interpreted it as a Roman ballista projectile. Now, I'll tell you what, right? If you're Sir Mortimer Wheeler and war is coming, this is going to be a good example of what invaders do, political. So, skeleton with spearhead lodged in spine, previously interpreted wrongly as a bolt or arrowhead from a Roman ballista. Roman ballista machines were those machines that there would be a crank, and you'd crank it and crank it and crank it at tension, and then eventually you would let the tension go, and this bolt, probably with a chain on it, would fire into a piece of wood or fire into something, and it would be very powerful, right? It could go through the defenses of anything, right? This is obviously, definitely, this is a sign that Maiden Castle was besieged. So for the archaeologists, the bodies were those of Britons who had died heroically defending the fort against a Roman legion. And obviously, it must have been what was happening. A scene that soon became a symbol of the supposed sudden and violent end of pre-Roman Britain. So, my friends, everything that we used to base Roman Britain on, and the invasion in Roman Britain, was a brutal and bloody conquest, right? If we look slowly at this, and we think if it was a brutal and bloody conquest of Britain, the slow narrative is that if the Romans are having to besiege 5,000 Iron Age forts, and if they had a casualty rate of 10 men per fort, that's 50,000 Roman legionaries. Do you see the maths just don't add up? For a long time, this narrative went unchallenged, appearing in books and articles and even television documentaries, as it aligned well with the pre-war political climate at the time, when fear of an imminent Bosch invasion permeated all aspects of British life, including archaeology. Archaeology was a very political thing. It still is. It really still is. Now, a study led by Bournemouth University debunks this story through a rigorous radiocarbon dating program, which allowed researchers to establish that the skeletons did not result from a single massacre, but from sporadic episodes of violence that occurred over several generations. Every generation blames the one before. From the late noughties BC to the early noughties AD. So before and after the birth of Christ. That is well before and during the period leading up to the formal Roman conquest. So in other words, most of the bodies that were found and excavated here, the ones that were radiocarbon dated, do not fit in with the story of Sir Mortimer Wheeler's site being besieged in AD 43. So according to Dr. Martin Smith, Associate Professor of Forensic and Biological Anthropology at Bournemouth, what a mouthful, who led the osteological analysis, the bone analysis, the discovery of dozens of human skeletons showing lethal weapon injuries was never in doubt. So in other words, what Sir Mortimer Wheeler did, he said most of these people have died because they've been killed. right? And they've all died at the same time. They didn't have radiocarbon dating in 1936. So it's now the radiocarbon dating program of the bones. We have been able to determine that these individuals died over a period of decades, not in a single terrible event. If that being the case, a very important case is there was never, ever this massive, brutal conquest of Britain. There may have been some battles that we've already mentioned. There may have been some sieges of these hill forts, but they're far and few between. And if there were any more than that, the Roman army wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. It doesn't matter how good the Roman army is. If you've got casualties, if you've got this is what, again, this is what the Germans found with the Battle of Britain in the early 1940s. They used up all their best pilots. They lost 1,000 planes. So you might have the best pilots, but when all your best pilots are gone, your army's not going to be any good. The metaphor from that is, if the Romans were constantly having to fight in Britain, they would not have stayed here. You see my point? So Dr. Miles Russell, senior lecturer in prehistory and Roman archaeology at the same university, Bournemouth University, and director of the investigation, openly questioned the traditional narrative. According to him, since the 1930s, the story of Britons fighting the Romans at one of the largest hill forts in the country has become a fixture in historical literature. Historical fact or fiction. With World War II just around the corner, and remember, Sir Mortimer Wheeler had been a bombardier in the First World War. He was a military man. He excavated all his archaeology based on a military principle. With World War II just around the corner, no one was really prepared to question the findings. The story of innocent men and women from the local Jurachiji tribe massacred by Rome is powerful and moving. It appears in countless articles, books, and television documentaries. It has become a pivotal moment in British history, marking the sudden and violent end of the Iron Age. The problem is that it simply doesn't appear to have happened in that way. This is Miles Russell. This isn't me. Current archaeological evidence points to something else, that Britons were killing other Britons, and that the bodies were buried in a fortification that no longer served a defensive purpose. Now that's even a giveaway, right? So these were not meant to be defensive places after a certain stage. These weren't proper defenses. If they're burying their dead in the defenses, right? Do you know what I mean? That's you can work that out. In this context, Wheeler's interpretation may have been influenced by the atmosphere of 1939, when a feared German landing, reminiscent of the Roman one centuries earlier, seemed imminent. The parallel was tempting. A foreign enemy looming, looting, destroying. Heroic resistance will fight them on the beaches with Winston Churchill. Inevitable defeat. We shall not be defeated. But history, as archaeology once again shows, rarely follows epic scripts. It really, really doesn't. Paul Cheetham, visiting researcher and archaeological scientist at Bournemouth, emphasises the coexistence of different burial rites in the same space and time suggests a complex society where identity and social hierarchy influenced how the dead were buried. This calls for abandoning the simplistic interpretations that dominated early archaeology in the 1900s. So the point to be made here, these people have been buried over a period of time. So we've got 50 odd burials. They're being buried over about 60, 70, 80 years. Right, if you work out the maths, several people are dying in some kind of little battle every year, but there's not many people dying. That's the point. These are not big battles. These may actually be, you guys over there, right? I got a woman, yeah. She reckons she can do you guys, right? So they have a little bit of a fight. One of them dies. It's like a duel, right? We don't find mass burials at this stage. There was a beef. They were fighting. It may have been duels we've had duels throughout history. The last duel in Britain was between Prime Minister Wellington in 1829. The last duel in southern England was between the prime minister of the day. That's a duel, right? So there's no reason why they couldn't have had duels in the Iron Age. It makes perfect sense. We'll sort out our problems. You got a strong woman, we got a strong woman. You got a strong man, we got a strong man, or we can mix it up. The researchers believe there is still much to uncover at Maiden Castle, where Wheeler's excavations explored only a fraction of the vast site, making it likely that more burials remain hidden among its monumental ramparts, and why not? And this was published in 2025, fraught with high strategy, a contextual and chronological reconsideration of the Maiden Castle Iron Age War Cemetery, Oxford Journal of Archaeology. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break there. As usual, I've worn myself out. So we're planning to end about 9:20, so we'll have a 10-minute break. But if there's any questions as Drina falls asleep, anything you want to say, Drina?
No, thank you.
Right. What about you, wonderful David?
No, thank you.
Who's next? Who's next? What we'll do Margaret.
Well, one reason why we shouldn't believe an awful lot of what the Romans say is I've got a book here called The Alternative Roman History.
Yeah, go on, give it to us. Go on. We
And
want to hear that.
he's repeating a speech or something that Julius Caesar wrote about
Go on.
animals. And he wrote about elks, a whole thing about elks, that they didn't have knees and they used to go to sleep by leaning against trees. and he apparently he was repeating something that Aristotle had said about elephants. Elephants didn't have knees, and people believed this up until the 17th century. And even though they could see for themselves that animals could kneel down, they still hung on to the Roman propaganda. They'd rather believe what these classical authorities had to say rather than what they could see with their own eyes.
I think it was in the 1400s, an Italian writer called Arnold of Todi used to say that Englishmen had tails. People used to believe that Englishmen had tails because somebody's written about it.
Yeah.
You know, and there was these one-legged people that used to wander around Africa, hopping around, and there'd be this one. Oh God, it was Mapple Mundi. You need to see it. Yeah, I love it, Hereford. Anyway, thanks for that, Margaret. Anne.
No, nothing. Thanks.
Andy.
No, nothing. Thank you.
Judith.
No, nothing, thank you.
Even though I've mentioned you a few times. And Roger, anything you want to say? We'll have a quick break.
No, not yet. No.
Look at the chat.
No.
Hang on, is there a chat? Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Gob choice.
Here we go. There's a bit of chat here. Yes, please, Romans, please. She likes her Romans because they're butch. According to one researcher, Magnus Maximus is related to Arthur, like everyone is.
Isn't related. It was a
Isn't?
mistake. No, it was a mistake. Somebody misread some ancient.
Oh, Arthur is related to
manuscript.
Arthur, which was accidentally misread as Arthur.
Yeah.
But then again, Caraticus is related to King Arthur.
They all are.
I'm related
All
to
the
King
King
Arthur.
Arthurs.
Yeah, I'm Spartacus, and so is my mum. Right, okay.
Isn't it something like 14 million people descended from Genghis Khan or whatever?
Yes.
So we're probably all related to Arthur then.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to mention it. Claire's definitely related. Right, okay then.
So you're getting excited again, Carl. Careful.
Yeah.
What?
You mentioned that name.
Oh no! I mentioned Clarecraft. That's what I meant. I got yeah. I'm going to be in deep trouble one day. Right, let's have a break. 10 minutes. We'll be back.
Very edgy. Oh.
Very.
Okay.
10 minutes. 8:45.
One. Okay. Oh. Oh, gee. Oh. I see. Oh. Well, but no.
Andy, is there any sign of you getting your boat back?
They're saying it's going to be finished end of June, beginning of July.
Right.
And they're going to sail it over to Roe Island first to get used to it. And then August, sort of September, they're going to bring it back up the estuary
Right.
to Arnside for a couple of months. And then it's going to winter at Roe Island because it can be worked on and safely moored there.
Right.
With any luck. But we haven't got a mooring for it really at the moment. So it's a bit of a problem. So
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of water in the estuary. So
You go out on it much?
no, I was there when it was launched on it. And I think I was on it when was taken out to be repaired. I think
Right.
that's the only two times I got on it in the end.
All right.
So I'd like to have a go on it, yeah.
Is Claire digging somewhere at the moment?
No, I don't think so. She's
I'm
either
sure
been up
astronaut.
or was going to go up for a day up at Carlisle again, but
Yeah.
with Tommy. So
With who?
Tommy,
Tommy?
yeah.
Oh, is Tommy back on the scene?
Well, he was for that. He keeps wanting to get involved in things, but every time I've mentioned anything that was going, well, we haven't done much, to be honest, since COVID, and not actual really any digging. The only digging was that excavating those bodies, and that was at very short notice. And Tommy was at work and couldn't make that. So
how's he doing?
Okay, I think I haven't actually seen or spoken to him for about 6 months. So I'll ask Claire when she comes in tonight if she's because he was going to go up and do some digging up there. So.
Yeah.
With that collar.
Is that what? Sorry.
What? Where's
No,
Carl?
Boy called Tommy.
It's a guy called Tommy that used to be in the class with us.
Tommy took it.
Yeah.
Gilbert's son.
He
Yeah.
did what? He chatted up Margaret.
No.
No.
Oh, gracious. Another one. Oh. Another one. What did he do then? Is he clever or something?
He's I think he works for BAE now.
Does he?
Yeah, he worked with me for a while doing decorating and renovating properties, but he qualified as a teacher but didn't enjoy the teaching, so he wasn't quite sure. He's only 30 odd. And then he went off to manage a company that supplied the yurt tents for people to camp in, and then COVID came along and that stopped that. So he then got an apprenticeship doing as an electrician at BAE.
Oh, fancy that. Good employers.
Yeah. So that's, as far as I know, is what he's doing at the moment. He wanted to buy out. He left me because he was self-employed and he needed to get a PAYE job because he wanted to buy a house. So he was a good hard worker, was Tommy. I was paying him more, but because it was self-employed, it didn't count. So,
What, you got a company now, Andy?
yeah, well, I'm only self-employed, so that's
well, decorating, isn't it?
yeah, it's mainly decorating, but I do repair work and I specialize in renovation if I can, so because I like doing that. But, I don't think you guys were around when he was in the class.
I remember any Tom.
No.
No, it's quite a long time ago, that, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember Gilbert?
Yes.
Right, well, yeah, well, Gilbert was his dad. Yeah.
Well, David will remember Tommy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking some of the others sometimes when we're online that I think Gilbert was on some of these online classes, wasn't he, if I remember right?
People have mentioned him.
We were probably still on, what was that other thing called, Skype?
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
Skype.
Maybe we were still on Skype, which wasn't the best, was it?
Too much messing.
We used to go to the arenas.
Do what?
And they used to bring the Skype to the arenas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Yeah. And cakes.
Right.
Yeah.
And
missed-
Lamb Henry.
Yes, it was really
Oh,
fun.
Lamb
Wasn't it?
Henry, yeah.
Really, we had lovely refreshments, didn't we?
Oh, we had a good time. I enjoyed
we used
those.
to have a feast.
I didn't have to worry
Right,
about
folks.
having my tea.
No.
Anyway, let's get the next bit underway.
All right, then.
The next bit. Sorry to crack on.
Part two.
Otherwise, Roger will get upset. You know he's like.
That's right. You got it. You know me.
Roger's got very special needs.
Yeah.
Oh,
My mum says I got special needs as well, Rog. So you're not on your own.
All in the same club.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Right. What I wanted to do is just give you an overview of a place that we've done little bits, but we haven't done it for a while. I'll just give you an overview of the Iron Age in Orkney and sort of take us up to the Romans, and then that'll be a nice bit of a close there. So the Brochs of Orkney have had so much attention lavished upon them that our view of the Iron Age is very biased in their favour. So, you know, one thing, we got these wonderful structures, some of the finest upstanding Iron Age archaeology in Britain, but it's remained because they're large tracts of the island are just desolate, you know, and there was more people living, for example, on Orkney 300 years ago than there is today. There were 40,000 people living on the islands of Orkney about 300 years ago, and now there's only 20,000. So you can get an idea why the archaeologists survived. Unlike England, where the Iron Age ended with the arrival of the Romans in AD 43 brackets, the Iron Age in Orkney continued all the way up to around the 700s. And it then just makes way for the Pictish period. So for a long time, Orcadian Iron Age, as in the rest of Scotland, was regarded as a time of unrest and conflict. Or was it? What made life in the Iron Age more dangerous than earlier periods? It's not really any more violent then in the Iron Age than it was before or after. It's just that you've got lots of archaeology that survived on Orkney. So it's a myth that it was very violent. The reason why the Iron Age acquired its reputation at a time of strife is due to the most widespread and highly visible symbols of the period, the Brochs. Lots of the Brochs are not just found in Orkney, they're found on Shetland. Some of the best Brochs are actually on Shetland and in the northern eastern part of Scotland, known as Caithness, and elsewhere. So the Brochs themselves, we visited these on a number of occasions, were seen solely as defensive strongholds constructed by people plagued by conflict. Until recently, these monumental dry stone towers dominated Iron Age studies. Broch-centered focus that influenced interpretation of life in the period, but now we're starting to realize the Brochs were a little bit more different than great towers for defense. Brochs are found, as we know, in a spread of area from Caithness all the way to Shetland. This distribution over such a widespread area and the long-held belief, a belief not based on fact really, they were nothing more than defensive refuges, painted a picture of bias, painted an Iron Age part of Scotland at war, in which fortifications across the Atlantic seaboard was a necessity. The Brochs came to be regarded as the creation of local elites caught up in countrywide turmoil and apparently under constant threat. Is this fact or fiction? So you've got Broch there. I visited the one at Gurness, and I've visited there's Gurness, and you've got a village leading to it. We've looked at this, we've done this one, but this is an overview. So while warfare and violence undoubtedly figured in the Iron Age, we mentioned a little bit about Maiden Castle, but is it massive battles and stuff, or maybe that's not the case? The idea of the Broch being a mere refuge has fallen out of favour. Our ideas of archaeologists with these structures has changed. Broch studies have come a long way from the antiquarian era and excavation of re-evaluation of previous investigations. Interjection. The image of a male-dominated, phallic, weapon-wielding group of Celtic thugs is now born into history with the emergence of a profession in history and archaeology dominated with women who thankfully got a different way of looking at history, away from death and destruction, more towards living. Broch studies have come a long way. When we think about these, we look at the wells that are found beneath these structures. We find lots of wells in these Brochs, suggesting there was much more to Brochs than mere one-dimensional fortification. We find wells in the Brochs in lots of cases. You know, that tells us something. You know, they built a Broch where a well is. You know, well, fresh water, important. At least 700 Brochs are known to have existed across this part of Scotland, Caithness, all the way through to Shetland, constructed and developed over the period between 600 years BC and AD 100, 200, 300. And the thing is, and when you talk about AD 100, you're talking about AD 43. It's now the Roman Britain in the south. And in Orkney, it's still the Iron Age. Interesting. We've got over 100 brocks recorded in Orkney. I've probably visited about 15 of them. But whether they were actually intended for defense or merely a highly visible symbol of wealth and prestige, their popularity declined in the by the 100s, 200s. So if they were defensive structures, why did people stop using them if they need them for defense? Do you see what I mean? There's a problem there, you know. So some of these structures being 13 meters high. In the case of Musa, which we've shown you loads of times, on Shetland, was 13 meters high. Amazing, yeah. The brocks are circular dry stone towers. One thing we need to say is that these are demonstrations of skill, their ability to create these things. Conical shaped towers have more than just a defensive aspect to them. They're shelter from the wind, they're shelter from the rain, they're shelter from the conditions to store things. In the winter months, they're brilliant structures to keep people alive. Inside the main chamber, from which small cells, either built into or up against the walls, branched off, a winding stone staircase housed within the brock's double walls led upwards to elevated floors, and in the case of Musa in Shetland, to the structure's wall head. Wandering around the wall head at Musa was brilliant, you know, looking out at the sea, but looking down as well through the cracks in the walkboard above, which were made of stone, and you could see, oh, you know, 13, 14 meters below you. Amazing. Brock seemed to be an evolution of roundhouses. So in other words, roundhouses become these. We don't see these being built in the south simply because they weren't needed, or people didn't think of building them, or they didn't have the technology, or there was no need. Like we see at Droplis, we don't need defensive structures like this. We didn't need the shelter from the winds and the rains that we could need in Shetland and West Wales and Cumbria. For example, somebody said today that there's been 151 millimeters of rain in a part of Cumbria, I think, this month, and there's been like 1 millimeter of rain in a town in southern England. So you can get an idea what's, you know, there's, if you don't need these things in southern England. Quite strange that. Like these, it is possible that brocks were no more than fortified dwellings or had a number of different aspects to them. There are, in some of these cases, there are ditches and banks and things cut into the rock. But are these defensive? Are they to keep people in? Are they to keep people out? In fact, the reality is, like in lots of Iron Age Britain, and when we look at Roman Britain, there is little evidence of fighting or any violence at any of these sites, any of these brocks. So we look at 700 brocks, and maybe 1 or 2 show signs of destruction, and the rest don't. What does that tell you?
Push.
It's not a violent world that these people live in. It's a violent world that the Romans say that these people lived in. It said Orkney's brock dwellers may have lived in a society where feuds over land and status were common. Perhaps not surprising considering the small area involved, but that actual conflict rarely escalates above local squabbles. It's what I always say with these sites, and what I always say with archaeology. If you're always at war, why would we be here today? If we were all dead and killing each other, we wouldn't exist today. There'd be no Britain, right? Death, killing people all the time results in nobody alive, right? Easter Island scenario, if that was the case, but it's not the case, but that's not the point. It is now generally believed that although defences may have played a part at brocks, were more likely to have been built prestige, a monumental marker to the landscape, highlighting the owner's social status, wealth and power. The likes of Martin Carruthers working at a broch on South Ronaldsley has basically almost proven that the broch there is more like a community centre, okay, where people are meeting, maybe they're metalworking, and they're doing all sorts of things in these structures. These structures have different uses and different palimpsests at different times in history. Palimpsests, that's a nice one, different bits of evidence. So Brock villages, obviously around these things, there's Brock villages, and some Brock stood alone, others had large villages around them. At one time, it was thought that the jumble of external buildings and walls outside the Brochs were later additions, but after the tower had fallen out of use. But in light of the excavations at Howe outside Stromness, which is on the main island, the West Island in Orkney, and the re-evaluation of the evidence from earlier Brock excavations, the idea seems to have fallen out of favour. So in other words, sometimes there were villages there and they built a Brock, other times there was a Brock there and they built a village, other than they worked together. Archaeologists are now of the opinion that settlements surrounding the Brocks were there from the start, clustered around the foot of the stone tower. People lived normal lives. One of the things that I do love in Orkney is these structures, and I've been down about four of them. These are souterrains. This is one at Mine Howe. I've mentioned Mine Howe as well in our Iron Age stuff. Again, going down those steps, you know, wonderful. So it's 19 feet down there. You're going down. Just as the Brock builders has their sights set on building above, people built below, emphasizing on digging deep into the ground. There's lots of reasons why you would dig deep into the ground. Storage, to well, yeah, you dig holes in the ground to grow. You might have a like we're doing in West Wales. We've got these two big underground greenhouses because it's very windy and they're perfect for growing things. You know, you might store eggs down them. You know, you might just build them because you're able to. You might have an affinity with the earth. You want to speak to ancestors. Loads of different reasons. For much of the past 2 centuries, the Scottish Iron Age was perceived as a pragmatic secular period with no links to anything else. But now we're working out that they're very different. A lack of ritual sites in the Iron Age, formal burials, and the purely functional martial role assigned to Brocks saw a series of highly elaborate underground structures. When this is not a well, this is a souterrain. So you've got wells and souterrains at these things, you know, souterrains, and you've got the wells. It's only in the past 2 decades that we're starting to see that that these have been recognised as being far too elaborate for the mundane roles once imposed upon them. So a well is a well. A hole in the ground is used for something simple rather than ritualistic or ceremonial. Much ink has been spilled debating the potential heights reached by the tower-like Brocks, but little or no attention paid to the seemingly obvious fact that as much emphasised in the Iron Age was put on digging deep as reaching skywards. So in other words, these people wanted to display their world in these things, but they also wanted to dig down and not display it. What does that tell you? Tells you something different. So these are the steps down to the well, not a souterrain like this, but a well that leads beneath the Broch of Gurness during the excavations in the 1930s. I've been to this site; it's great. So what we think is we've got achievements of digging into the rock in the ground, underground chambers, souterrains and well houses. So they build these things because they want access to water, or they build these things because they want to do something else with them. Cellars, cisterns, wells, all these different things, purely functional. So when I remember going here to a site which is, hang on, I went to that one there as well. I've been to Gurdes, but I went to Mid Howe. The archaeologist at Mid Howe, she was saying that the well there was like a rite of passage well. So you'd be put down the well, and there's water down there, and you'd be trapped down there for a month, and you'd learn how to be a man. And you're thinking, but it's a well. Why do you need anything more complicated than that, right? So the seemingly obvious fact that these wells, underground passage, souterrain well, the seemingly obvious fact that these wells went far beyond that required for a simple water source did little dispel the notion that they were purely utilitarian. They could be purely utilitarian. You know, there's lots of things. You might need the well water for industrial processes like metalworking, right? So in other words, a well inside a broch that you're able to draw out water for metalworking to make metal tools. is very important within the architecture of the archaeology, rather than just thinking that they're undisputably ritual. They're undisputably for a purpose, for survival. Metalworking and trade is big in the Iron Age. They're not just a ritualistic society banding around building blocks for the sake of it. They're working metal in these buildings. They're not just building these underground water systems for water just for the sake of it. They're building because they need the water, and also they might need the water for metalworking. It's a supply. You need to make tools and so on. So one of the, and this is where we get to this site at Mid Howe in Tenkeness. This site here, been here a couple of times. The metalworking assemblage was hailed as one of the best in Iron Age Britain. So in other words, we've got a metalworking site here, which was utilised into the Roman era Britain period, into the 100s, 200s, 300s. Right? They found Roman pottery here as well. Near about, they got a massive Iron Age metalworking site. So it must be that this thing might have something to do with it, because you could have held water down here as well, rather than just a ritualistic thing to blow your mind if you want to have a rite of passage. Right, so Iron Age Orkney was definitely not isolated. It was definitely not isolated. With discoveries of Roman pottery and artifacts at several sites across the islands, the accounts of Pythias, the accounts of Pythias in 325 BC. At the same time, Alexander the Great was marching across back from India, right, before he's assassinated. Pythias was in Britain, and he visited Britain, right, probably the islands of Orkney. So, you know, people knew that Orkney existed. It wasn't completely isolated. The first thing that you see here, the remains of the woman carefully buried beneath the floor of a smithy at Mine Howe. That stone has not been deliberately smashed into her head. It's collapsed into her head after the burial has decayed and so on. Right, that's what it looks like. And look at that interesting object there with 6 little holes in it. But that's for another lecture. But the point is, what you've got is what we're now starting to find. Instead of an isolated world in the Iron Age where we're not finding bodies, we're actually starting to find bodies underneath buildings. The remains of this body was found under the floor of the smithy building at Mine Howe, linking in this wonderful underground building and all the other evidence and trade and the worldwide landscape. Although we have ample evidence about how the people of Iron Age Orkney lived, one area that remains clouded in uncertainty. What did they do with the dead? Now we're starting to work that out. It's one of the things that we've done through the Iron Age. You know, what did they do with the dead? You know, but now we're starting to find them out. On Orkney, some excavations have revealed burials in stone cists, where others have shown bodies or body parts incorporated into houses, placed in the walls or under the floor. In this case, a whole body. At Mine Howe, this body. The remains of a woman were found carefully buried under the floor of a metalworking smithy, while the body of a violently killed man was deposited in a pit outside. So she was buried in a nice way. Maybe the man was killed by her. I don't know. But the point is, right? What we want to see with this one. Is that the individual had been buried after rigor mortis has set in, so the toes were broken, forcing the corpse into a shallow grave. That was the man, right? But this woman, she's complete. She's lovingly buried. And this is a woman. Oh God, can't bury women like this. Decorated potsherds from the man's grave matched and fitted a fragment from the woman's grave, suggesting they were both interred at the same time. She was buried like this, and the man was just dumped in a hole. So, and what we're talking about is more of these excavations. So, when they were working at this site at Stromness, which I used to stay at Stromness, a place called Howe, and I think I went there. Remains of 12 to 18 people deposited in the rubble of a broch at the ongoing excavation at the Carnes, South Ronaldsay, excavated by my former lecturer, Dr. Martin Carruthers. a male jawbone was found to have been placed in a whalebone vessel and set up against the building's wall. So now starting to find bodies. This site on another island at Orkney called Westray in 2004, the remains of well over 100 individuals were found in and around several Iron Age buildings. So when the village is abandoned, bodies are then placed into the ground. It makes sense. We see this a lot. Old abandoned places, that's where we used to bury people. It's well-known battlefields, for example. But we're not talking about these big battlefields, so about empty abandoned places where you bury people, So the majority of the human remains, representing around 75% of the Iron Age bodies in Scotland, were mainly neonatal or infant skeletons, but now we're finding complete bodies, we're finding bodies of people, and we're finding their limbs, and we're starting to find disarticulated human remains, some of which deliberately incorporated into walls and surrounding buildings. So things are changing. We're starting to find bodies. We're starting to really understand what's going on. The excavations of the male remains in a shallow pit at Mine How. This is the one that's been dumped in the pit. We've dumped in the pit. We've taken off, to force it in. Your feet bone have gone, right? So this is all really intriguing stuff. So Orkney really starts to help us understand. So the metalworking and the bodies at Mine How, among the finds in these was a mould for a pin identical to one recovered from a nearby grave, a pin that was perhaps used to fasten a burial shroud around the tightly crouched corpse. So back to this site here. So at the No O Skye site at Westray, there appeared to be a link between the process of working metal and Iron Age burial rites or the concepts of death. So what we're talking about is lots of these things are linked: water, metal working, burial, how people are placed into the ground. All these things are linked, but they are linked with the living. So what we can finally say about Orkney, just as a complete goodbye to Orkney, the reuse. One thing that they're doing on Orkney, they're finding a lot of buildings reused in the Iron Age. So we know that Iron Age Arcadians continue to use, and in some cases use earlier sites, but they're respecting earlier sites at the same time. So they may be demolishing Iron Age buildings, but burial sites, they're keeping those burial sites from the Neolithic sacred in the Iron Age. But the old buildings that people used to live, they're using them in modern buildings. There's a continuity there. So on one situation, they did actually find the reverse, where they found a chambered cairn, which outside the structure, instead of living inside the chambered cairn, they lived outside in a stone roundhouse, which preserved the integrity of the Neolithic structure. So people in the Neolithic period are respected in the Iron Age. That's a really interesting point as well, which we actually see Iron Age hill forts in southern England. So what we see Bronze Age barrows that are near defences, which are not flattened, which are kept within the landscape associated with the Iron Age hill fort. So in Orkney, what they're finding is burial places, which they're in turn respectfully keeping and living outside these sites, and keeping the bones inside and keeping that respect. After thousands of years of burials there, the Iron Age, they're still respecting what's gone on before. And then what we see with the likes of the Nessa Brodgar is some results which will be coming out very soon, with the relationship with the Nessa Brodgar excavations finishing this year and the Iron Age evidence that they found there. So what we do find, we do find sherds of Iron Age pottery in Orkney, and we find lots of living evidence in Orkney. And then eventually, to close this little section today, we then, as the Iron Age slowly starts to come to an end, it comes into this illuminated age in Orkney and Shetland, where the Picts suddenly appear, or the art of the Picts exists. Where in southern England, what you've got you've got your Ogham stones and you've got your carved stones and you've got Christianity. In Scotland, you've got something else going on where you've got the Picts moving in to the field of existence. And then what we're going to do finally is, as we've got a tiny little bit of time, I just want to do a few little quick things, right? Just a few quick things. A few quick things from the Iron Age, and we'll do Vercingetorix next week. So the quick things are just a few bits of news. This one, yeah. Archaeology breakthrough as rare prehistoric chariot wheel unearthed at UK golf course, Scotland. And this is an Iron Age find discovered alongside artifacts dating from 3,500 years ago as well. So archaeologists have unearthed a prehistoric chariot wheel, again associated with the golf course. And this is an Iron Age chariot wheel because it's made of iron, so it can't be Bronze Age. So the rare wheel was one of several discoveries found at the site of a new championship golf course near Inverness. The excavations also uncovered other archaeology, and so this chariot wheel, this piece of archaeology, paints a picture of ancient life in the Highlands, from ceremonial practices to agricultural innovation and chariot wheels. So in other words, what we're talking about in Scotland, they do have chariot type burials. So they've got chariots and carts going on in Scotland, whereas hitherto we might have thought up in those upland areas they didn't. And do you know what we were saying a few weeks ago? We've got lots of clearances in the Iron Age where we've got small fields and so on, which the Romans don't tell us about. We've got under the impression of Scotland is just full of woodlands and forests, but that's not the case. It's a very different world. If you've got open agricultural landscapes and farming and sheep and settlements and houses and chariot wheels, you know, things are very different in Lower Scotland, very different in North Scotland. When you've got the Brochs, for example, that was all linked nicely together. And I just wanted to remind us again, we've already done this, but in March, we mentioned this unprecedented Iron Age hoard, the Mel Zombie hoard, North Yorkshire. I just wanted to mention this again. Just wanted to help us understand this great period of the Iron Age. 800 items, including 2 cauldrons, statues of Lloyd George, vessels, horse harnesses, bridle bits, ceremonial spears, and 28 iron tires. There they are. Love it. Believed to have been buried 2,000 years ago. Unprecedented finds, unprecedented life, unprecedented broadcasting, the mightiness of this, and obviously being found in 2022 and reported this year in March. Whoever originally owned the material in this hoard was probably part of a network of elites across Britain, or a very powerful group of people who could afford to bury this. Now that's one thing that we gotta remember. I think this is one thing you need to take away from tonight. If people are able to bury these things, they could afford to let them go because they already had lots. It's a bit like the Sutton Hoo ship burial. We're starting to learn more about that. You know, Time Team's work, and you see that on YouTube. Tony Robinson really recently, but and you got that wonderful sort of copper cauldron as well that they've been looking at recently. But you're thinking these things are buried because they could afford to bury them with people, right? If you're able to afford to bury these things, it means that you're incredibly wealthy. So what the people kept with them was probably a lot more than this, right? The people who owned this were highly rich. So, you know, what they're saying as well is lots of these things have been burned and destroyed as well. The destruction of so many high status objects evident in this hoard is also a scale rarely seen. So in other words, they were not only disposing their things, they were actually destroying them as well. It's almost as if, you know, they've got more, what's that saying, more money than sense, you know. And the Belmondsey hoard, and just giving you an idea. And finally, it's 9:21, so we'll finish now. So a copper alloy harness fitting decorated with coral and held in place with tiny rivets was among the items discovered. And in view of understanding the Iron Age, and looking at this Belmonte hoard and looking at the chariot wheel and everything else that we've looked across tonight, this is one of the most important and exciting Iron Age periods made in the UK. This is and overall with the Iron Age stuff that we know about now, this is the most exciting period of understanding the Iron Age today, with all the new discoveries coming out alongside this Belmonte hoard. This hoard itself sheds new light and life on Iron Age life in the north and Britain, but it also demonstrates connections with Europe. Is this the Celtic period in Britain, or is this just simply the British Iron Age? Because when you go through this article, it mentions Iron Age. It doesn't mention Celts once. And one last thing, and we're going to close. This Iron Age hoard is an unprecedented find in the north, which will help us to understand more about this remarkable period in our history. We have the exciting opportunity to save the hoard for the nation and the people of Yorkshire and display it there, and to put the display to put the hoard on display. It's a fascinating period. We can learn about why it was buried, how the objects may have been used, and to cast light onto whom it may have belonged. But it certainly belongs to a people of the Iron Age that were far more richer, far more understandable, far more accessible, far more like us than our history teachers ever told us many years ago in school. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Let's see if there are any questions. Right, okay. Start. Oh, look at David's padded jacket. Looks warm in that. David, anything you want to say tonight?
No, thank you very much. Bye all.
Night, David.
Bye.
David.
Night, David. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one. We all need to take David out for a pint one night. And Tommy. Night, David. Margaret. Night.
I wonder, I did see a headline about that Iron Age hoard that they found, and they said could be linked to Cartimandua, the Iron Age queen of the Brigantes.
Well, do you know what I'm going to say? Do you know what I'm going to say? Why can't it be linked to another leader that we don't know of their existence? I'm not having a go at you at all. Well, one of the problems is when we have a figure in history, everything's related to it. King Arthur, everything's related to King Arthur. Robin Hood, it's all related to Robin Hood. It all goes back to Plato's discovery of the fact that there may have been an Atlantis, right? If Plato hadn't written down Atlantis and his documents hadn't survived, Atlantis would never have existed, right? So nobody'd be looking for Atlantis. We've got to be very careful about linking things with figures in history. I would like to link it with somebody else.
Well, in this book, The Alternative Roman History, it's talking about the barbarian women, which is us, and the wife of Septimus Severus.
Yes,
who sounds as if he's from Harry Potter.
Probably is.
She was shocked by the apparent openness with which Celtic women chose their husbands and lovers. She declared that it showed a complete lack of moral scruple. And apparently in AD 40, the Roman Senate decreed that prostitutes should make their hair blonde, the colour the Romans associated with Celtic women, because they found it very erotic.
Oh, Roger, it's turning me on.
Carl, take it easy, Carl. You do get excited.
So that was a law in AD 40 that the prostitutes had to dye their hair blonde.
Well, I got to be honest with you. My Michelle is a very special woman, right? And she's got red hair, not blonde, so you can hardly.
Even better, I'd say.
My woman's a
not
real
that
tiger.
You're partisan and biased in any shape or form, Margaret.
No. Oh yeah, I forgot she's a red-headed bimbo as well. I'm not talking about you, Judith. Right, anything else, Margaret?
Well, I could say, look, this is a really good book. I should maybe send it to you. It's really good. No, nothing else. Thank you. Very
You
interesting.
need to keep
Everything.
delving into it, love. Delve into it. Right. Okay. Then. Thank you for that, Margaret. Gina, anything from you, love?
I seem to remember a long time ago you were talking about Boudica, and you suggested that there was no physical evidence of her having existed. Have I got that wrong?
Right. Okay. Okay. Actually, that is correct, because other than the Romans writing about Boudica, right? Right. Okay. There's a point here. There's physical evidence of the rebellion happening, which I can tell you all about. We're going to go into that. We've got big black thick layers through Camel and Dunham.
Yeah.
Colchester. We got big thick black layers. We know a moment in time, roughly around AD 60, that there was something so terrible that many thousands of people were slaughtered. We know that existed. We know the rebellion happened. Right. But other than the Romans telling us about Boudica, right, which is quite unusual, saying that this woman stood up against us, right? There's nobody from the British side telling us of Boudica's existence, right? So in other words, we're completely reliant upon the Romans, what the Romans said. The archaeology tells us that this rebellion was led by somebody whose figurehead name is Boudica. Right. It's a bit like Joan of Arc. We know Joan of Arc existed. We know we've got all the accounts and records of Joan of Arc, and there's people from her side and their side writing that Joan of Arc existed. Right. We know that happened. Right. However, on the side of Boudica, what we've got is what the Romans are telling us. Right. And this is why we need to look at the Boudica story in more of an enlightened way.
Okay, thank you.
Good. I'm glad you challenged me there. I'm glad you did. If I did say that, I did say that, and I've explained why. I would like to feel that there is somebody called Boudica out there, but let's see her when we do it. Right. Thank you very much. Right, Anne.
No, I've enjoyed it. But I'm a bit snoozy tonight, not taking everything in, I'm afraid.
All right, it's okay. Thank you very much anyway. Roger, anything from you, Dirty Rog?
In particular, but quite interesting what you said then about proving the fact. It happens with all of history. Did Jesus Christ exist? Did this? Did that happen? Because people very often, more than making it up, embellish things. Like the Romans, a big grand reception at home and all the rest of it, and a big name, macho, and all this is the biggest thing in the world. You don't kill somebody, but that was the thing at the time. Killing and dying didn't matter. And I thought the more they can do it, the better they get the acclaim. And I think it's difficult, even when you're finding items, to say what was this used for. You know what I mean? You say, well, like the hill forts and stuff, so called. It's a difficult one, and you're forever trying to prove it because of interpreting what you get anyway on a dig. As you know, Carl, got a dig, you're immediately trying to interpret what the heck was happening. It's a tricky one.
Do you know? Yeah, you are right, Roger. Do you know what? I've done 2 bits of field work in the past 3 weeks, and I've just published them on the weekend, and I was so pleased to get them out. One of them was looking at 2 holes in the ground on the place in West Wales, and there was nothing in the trenches. But that's my interpretation. There could be something in one of the trenches, but it depends how you look at it. But there's no structural, there's no artifacts. And then what we've got, I recorded something else that was like this weird little trackway type thing that might actually be part of the original medieval droveway, which I've written about and I've published that. But somebody could take that apart and say, that's not true. So it is a lot about interpretation. And I've been thinking a lot about Jesus and then Christianity. And I thought, well, if you take away everything that is Christian and you leave with the stories of Jesus Christ, right, you can't go too far wrong. It's when you've embellished it, which ruins the story.
That's right. Well, it's a whole new raft of things then, with
people
reading parts of the Bible, which a lot of the Old Testament was written as a sort of allegory, stories.
Yes.
To tell very simple people something instead of being frightened of everything around them and not knowing what the heck was going on, which is followed through with a bit less. Science hasn't cured things. We can copy things and check things, but the whole point of all this is our quest to try and understand and trust to see what's going on. So it's quite an interesting thing, all of it. But a lot of the things written, like going back to the Jesus Christ of the Bible and stuff, parts of that were lost, some have been found. It's what was interpreted in France and the rest of it over the years, the Pope. You know what I mean? So it's trusting the past, really, from what we're seeing.
And understanding it exactly. Right. Okay. Thank you for that, Roger. Judith.
No, nothing to ask or comment on. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, Andy.
No, nothing really to add to it, other than that there is a very big statue of Boudica, so she must have existed.
Well, that goes without saying. You know, that goes without saying. I am
Lloyd George. Yes.
Yeah, well, I am the down the lane generational sperm count of Lloyd George. I am proof.
Yep.
But Tacitus did describe her quite fully, didn't he?
What's that got to do with Lloyd George?
I don't think he knew Lloyd George. He would have done if he'd known him.
Yeah.
Wonderful foresight. Yeah.
Of course he bloody would have, you silly man. Right, what's that, Margaret?
Just that Tacitus described her. She had very long waist-length hair, and she got a hoarse, a very frightening voice, apparently.
Yeah, like most women.
It'd be funny if he got the wrong person, wouldn't it? Well, I thought that was Boudica. Who's that then? Oh,
hang on. Was it a short woman with red hair with an attitude? That's my Michelle.
The equivalent of Rena Sharples.
Oh no.
Right, I'm going to have to go because Claire will be in a minute.
Okay.
All right then. I really appreciated everybody's time. We're doing Vercingetorix. We're doing Elise next week. Thank you very much. Night, Andy. Night, Judith. Night, Roger, and Margaret, Gina, and the Pope. Night, folks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Night, folks. Night. Night, Anne.
Good night.
Night. See you next week.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go online now and let's just see where we are. Oh my fucking God. Trust his word. Howard Crowhurst. Who the fuck Howard Crowhurst shows? That's from my party. I bet the Satwell back. And Japanese. Oh my fucking God. Trust his word. Howard Crowhurst. Who the fuck Howard Crowhurst shows? That's from my party. I bet the Satwell back. And Japanese. Oh God, I've just been reading out what Dodgy Git has been saying. Oh my God. And that was all on the thing. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, folks. Anyway, thanks, Dodgy Git. So let's just go through this finally from Judith. I said, yes, please, Romans, please, smile. Yes, please, Roman, please, smile. That's Judith wanting more of the Romans. According to one researcher, Magnus Maximus is related to Arthur, which was accidentally misread as Arthur. Arthur, like it. So there we go. Romans, please. And according to one researcher, Magnus Maximus, oh God, Romans, please. According to one researcher, Magnus Maximus is related to Arthur, which was accidentally misread as Arthur. Yeah, big small. Anyway, thank you, Judith. Nothing else in that box 1, nothing else in that box 2, 3, 4, nothing in that box 7, 8, 9, 10. That's the text stuff done. Nostalgia, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. Elise, hopefully you're watching this. Put a